Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is finishing up lunch. We will be starting probably just after 1 to give folks some time to log in. So thanks for joining us. Sit tight. We will be starting soon. Again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Appold, and I'll be walking you through today's webinar. Giving folks maybe another minute or so to log in. We are starting just after lunch here in California. But thank you so much for joining us. I know that everyone is pretty busy these days. This is really meant to be kind of an informal webinar, and we have a pretty small attendee list, which is great because that leaves a lot of time for question and answers. So again, let's give another minute for folks to join us, and then we'll get started at 1:02 p.m. Alrighty, I think we've hit critical mass. Again, welcome to a really meant to be an informal webinar, training, workshop, brown bag, whatever you want to call it. It's supposed to be a bit more informal than some of the other webinars we've been hosting. This is meant to provide an overview on how to navigate some of the raw data that fed into the drinking water needs assessment, but specifically related to the risk assessment and the affordability assessment. Before we begin, I'm going to just talk a little bit about meeting logistics. For those that are participating via Zoom, please use the chat, the Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. We are trying to keep this a little bit more informal, and we do have a staff person with DDW's Needs Analysis Unit, Bunsari Taylor, who's going to be reviewing those questions as they come in through the Q&A box, and she will interrupt me and ask me those questions as we go. That way we can address those questions while we're covering certain pieces of content. So please open up that question and answer screen, and please feel free to use it throughout the presentation to ask your questions. Also, because we have a very manageable group here today, you can also use the Zoom feature to raise your hand, and Bunsari again will interrupt me and can unmute you if you would like to verbally ask your question if you don't want to use the question and answer box. This webinar is being recorded and webcasted through our Cal EPA webcast. For those who are watching this webinar through that webcast, you can email us your questions to our SAFER email account, which is safer@waterboards.ca.gov. Again, that's safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have a staff person who's also monitoring that inbox. So if we get any questions through that, we can ask them during this presentation. Okay. I'm going to just provide a super brief overview again of what is the risk assessment and the affordability assessment and the broader needs assessment, just to provide some context for folks who maybe haven't participated in any of the previous webinars that we've been doing. But again, I want to keep it pretty light and have lots of time to walk through our spreadsheets. So really, it all begins with Senate Bill 200 and the Safer program for the State Water Board. We have a new funding source, the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and a new program to help implement that funding, but so much more. We help with consolidation, we help with the administrators program, we provide technical assistance and capacity building. You know, under the Safer program, where my unit is based, we are required to do this annual drinking water needs assessment to really help inform how this new funding program is implemented, and also how to direct our staff resources across the state to target, you know, which communities we engage with on consolidation or other projects. The needs assessment, this was our first year that we did it, and we released the report in April, and it's available on our website, and you can get to it through this URL here. We could share these slides after the presentation if you don't know how to get to it. The needs assessment has three core components: the risk assessment, the cost assessment, and the affordability assessment. And today we're really going to be focusing on the risk assessment and the affordability assessment and how to navigate the results. This is our website. Again, if you have not seen the paper, or if you have not downloaded the spreadsheets that we're going to walk through today, this is how you get there. And we keep this pretty up to date. If we have to do any sort of refreshes, we make sure that we do them in a timely manner, all on this webpage. Okay. Before I get into the risk assessment, I just want to, for those who maybe haven't followed along super closely, I just want to quickly explain what human right to water systems are, because you're going to see them mentioned throughout the risk assessment and the affordability assessment. So the State Water Board has criteria that we use to identify what we call our failing water systems. And those are systems that are not meeting our human right to water criteria, which is why we use the acronym HR2W, our human right to water list. It's really those failing water systems. And these systems are important because we exclude them from the final results of our risk assessment, and we highlight them in our affordability assessment. So you're going to see them mentioned in a few places, and if you're not familiar with what are they, I wanted to give you an opportunity to learn quickly what it is. So failing water systems, they could be failing because they currently have a primary or secondary MCL violation with an open enforcement action, or an E. coli violation with an open enforcement action. They may have treatment technique violations with an open enforcement actions, or they've had 3 or more treatment technique violations in the past 3 years. And then monitoring and reporting violations, if they've had 3 or more in the last 3 years, and one of them still has an open enforcement action that's been open for 15 months or greater. This criteria was recently expanded, and you can see that on the slide here, but we are using this to identify our systems that are failing. But in order to help direct our technical assistance, our engagement, our funding towards systems before they fail, so we can be a bit more proactive here at the State Water Board, we wanted to develop a risk assessment to help us identify those systems that we should be targeting. And so we worked with UCLA and a bunch of other stakeholders to develop a very comprehensive risk assessment to identify these systems that are at risk of failing. our risk assessment is only conducted for our smaller public water systems, those with 3,300 service connections or less. It does include K through 12 schools as well. We did exclude wholesalers, and there are certain pieces of our risk assessment where we excluded certain types of systems, like where we look at affordability. We excluded schools, we excluded hotels and summer camps and some of these other types of public water systems. So you can learn more about that in our report. But our risk assessment, again, limited to public water systems with 3,300 service connections or less. I'm going to walk you through kind of what the methodology is for the risk assessment at a very high level, and you can learn a whole lot more about it in our paper and all of our workshops and things that we've been hosting over the last year. But what's really important here is that we look at 19 different pieces of data, different metrics to try to assess risk at public water systems. And it was a huge process narrowing down the list of 129 potential indicators down to the 19 that we used here. There's a lot of information in our published reports on what the definition is for these indicators, how we determined what they are, the different thresholds and scores that we have for them. And I'm going to go through some of that in this presentation, but if you want to dive deep, all of that is available online on our website and in our final needs assessment report.
Kristen?
Yes.
We just received a question. They're asking, are wholesalers ineligible for safer funding since they have been excluded from the risk assessment?
That's a fantastic question. Wholesalers are not excluded from safer funding, but what we recognized in the risk assessment was that a lot of our risk indicators were not really applicable to wholesalers. So wholesalers definitely could still access safer funding and and water board funding. And if they're experiencing some issues, they should definitely get in contact with us, and we can help them figure out who to connect with. So that's a fantastic question. You know, one thing that I didn't mention here is that we do have a risk assessment methodology that we developed for state small water systems and domestic wells, which is very different than the methodology I'm going to walk you through for public water systems. And so as our program develops and we get better data and we work with our stakeholders, we're going to be developing more refined risk assessments for different types of systems so that we can get better at identifying systems that truly are at risk of failing. So great question, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Bunsery.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yep. Okay, so I'm not going to hover here because I'm actually going to walk through each of these indicators in just a little bit. So we have key risk indicators or metrics that we're looking at for each public water system with 3,300 service connections or less. And this is just a quick kind of visualization on how we do it. So we take the individual risk indicators and we look at how water systems are performing within each indicator. And we have different weights that we've applied to certain indicators. So there are some metrics that the water board felt like had more criticality than other indicators included in the assessment. So we have different weights applied to each indicator so that it's a more balanced risk assessment. Like we had in the previous slide, we group our risk indicators into these different category buckets, if you will. So water quality, accessibility, affordability, and TMF capacity, which stands for technical, managerial, and financial capacity. In all of our public outreach and engagement on developing our methodology, the feedback that we received consistently over the past year was that in addition to having different weights for our individual indicators, we should also have weights on our categories, because from what we heard, a lot of folks felt like water quality should be weighted the most. And so what we did was we worked with the public to identify weights between 1 and 3. And you can see here that water quality has the highest weight of 3, accessibility and TMF capacity 2, and affordability has a weight of 1. And I'll talk through the reasoning on that in just a bit. But we take the combined scores across all the categories, and then we have our combined risk assessment. And it's a final number that helps us determine whether or not that water system is at risk or potentially at risk. So let's look at an example of how this plays out. So one of our water quality risk indicators is maximum duration of high potential exposure. And for that individual risk indicator, we have 3 different thresholds. So we're trying to look at performance, right? And for this one, maximum duration of high potential exposure is when a source is above an MCL, like how long was it above the MCL? What we're looking at, how long communities may have been exposed to water quality issues. So if there's 0 years, that's our baseline, right? The score is going to be 0. Obviously, there's no weight, there's no total risk score. So 0, 0, 0, it does not count against the water system. The second threshold is 1 year, and we gave a raw score of 0.25. And you can see our raw scores are between 0 and 1. The individual weight that we gave for this risk indicator, and talking to the public and the engineers, everyone felt like this was a really important risk indicator. And so we gave the maximum weight of 3. So we take the score, which is 0.25, and then we multiply it by the weight of the indicator, which is 3. And so the total risk indicator here is 0.75 if they hit the 1 year threshold. And then you can see how it goes up. Now, this is one of our more complicated ones that had, 3 different thresholds. We have some risk indicators that only had 1 threshold. So it was like binary. It's a yes or no, you have it or you don't. But we wanted to bake in some additional thresholds for some of these indicators that kind of gave more leeway for how we apply scores and weights. And again, we used for all of our scores for each individual risk indicator, a score of 0 to 1. And the weights that we use for both the individual indicators and the categories is between 1 and 3. And this is kind of what the math looks like when we aggregate it all together. So you have the water quality bucket for here. You have the score and the weight for each individual indicator. And we add them all up within the bucket. And then we divide by the number of indicators that we have the data for. So for here in our water quality bucket, we have 6 indicators. So we divide by 6. That is the water quality risk indicator score, which we then multiply by the weight within the category. So if you remember, the water quality weight is 3. And then we do that across all of the 4 categories, and we divide by the number of categories that the water systems were evaluated for, which is 4. And then we get our total weighted and adjusted aggregated risk assessment score.
Kristen, we
Yes,
received another question. How were the values of ranges, example between 0 and we established? Was a global risk metrics referenced? If so, can you please share the risk metrics reference?
So that's a fantastic question. I think when she's talking about the range of scores is probably our thresholds. How are we determining when performance within a certain metric was more, risky? And we did a literature review. We did surveys of district engineers. We looked at existing regulations and policy to help us determine our different thresholds for each individual risk indicator. And all of that is detailed in our final report in our appendix. And you can also find more of that in some of our white papers that we were using as we developed our methodology. Specifically, our October risk assessment white paper has quite a bit of information on how we identified individual risk indicators And then our December white paper had more information on how we were determining the different thresholds and scores associated with each. So that is all documented. We don't have a risk matrix that we were referencing, but we do have documentation of how we developed all of our thresholds. Are there any other questions, Bansuri, before I move on?
Yes, we got another one. They're asking, what are the assessment used for? Forced consolidation or financial assistance, or both?
So that's a fantastic question, and we get that often, is how do you use the results of this assessment? And the State Water Board uses the results of the risk assessment for helping to make decisions around which water systems are prioritized for funding and technical assistance. There is no, I do air quote, there's no negative repercussions for being on the at-risk list or for being designated at risk. We cannot do forced consolidation for an at-risk water system. There's no enforcement or violations that take place because of an at-risk status. It is purely based on, it purely is related to how we target our funding and technical assistance. So hopefully that helps. Okay, I'm going to keep moving unless there's any other questions, Bansuri.
Nope, I think we've resolved what I was
saying. Okay, so this is how the math works. But we often get questions, and we had to think through, well, how do we deal with missing data? We know that there's going to be a lot of water systems that probably weren't providing us affordability related data, for example, because it was not required in some of our annual reporting that we do. And so the way that we adjust for it is, if you recall, in this up at the top here for each category, you can see that we divide by the number of risk indicators in each category. So if we have a water system that's missing a data point, we change that number to reflect the actual number of indicators that we have the data for. And what this helps us do is normalize the data and also redistribute the weights across the other risk indicators in that category. And we do the exact same thing for the categories. So if, for example, like we said earlier, we exclude schools from the affordability assessment, mostly because a lot of our affordability indicators are based on what the water rates are, and a lot of schools obviously don't charge for water, so they would not have data here. So instead of dividing by 4, we divide by 3 because we've excluded them from the affordability risk indicator category. So that's how our math works. And so I want to just briefly walk you through the different risk indicators that we have at a super high level, because we often get some questions about individual risk indicators, and I want to make sure you have that space to ask questions before we dive into the data that we have from water systems for each of these data points. Okay, so this is the water quality category. And in water quality, we have 6 risk indicators. You'll see in each of these tables, we have the name of the indicator on the left. We have the thresholds and scores that were used in the middle. And then we have what the weight was for that risk indicator. So remember, what's in parentheses are the scores. So for this indicator, if they get a 1, it's going to be multiplied by 3. So their total risk indicator point here would be 3. And that's what would be added up for the category. So E. coli presence is looking at, within the last few years, if the water system has had a E. coli violation or a level 2 assessment. And this is a yes or no risk indicator. They either have had one of those things or they have not. And if they had, they get the full risk score of 1, which is then multiplied by the weight of 3. The increasing presence of water quality trends towards MCL. This is a bit of a complicated risk indicator, and I do encourage you to dive into our definition and background information in our paper to learn more about it. But what this is looking at is water quality data from sources, looking at if the water quality results are at 80% or above the MCL, and the water quality results are trending upwards greater than a certain percentage point. I think we did 20% for acute. Then it's going to trigger the threshold for this indicator. So let's do an example. So we have, if no increasing presence of water quality trends towards the MCL to 0, no risk points for you. For secondary contaminants, if the water quality result was above the MCL and trending upwards, then it's 1/4 of a point, multiplied by 2. If it was a primary non-acute contaminant, again, that's above the MCL, or not above the MCL, above 80% of the MCL and trending upwards, it's 1/2 a point. And if it's happening with an acute contaminant, you get a full point. So for this, we're trying to be cognizant of water systems that may have had water quality sitting at 80% or above, but haven't actually exceeded the MCL, and they've never exceeded the MCL. If there's no movement, we don't want to penalize them with a risk score. It's really only if we start seeing that water quality decline that we would say that there's some risk there. The third one here is treatment technique violations. This is another one of our binary data points. Either they've had a treatment technique violation within the last few years, or they haven't. If they have, it's 1 point, and the weight here is 1. Okay. Past presence on the human right to water list. This is looking at whether or not they've had an MCL violation before. Have they been a failing water system? And we've been keeping track of our systems that have been on our human right to water list. If there's been 1 occurrence within the last few years, it's 1/2 a point. If there's been 2 or more occurrences, then it's 1 point. I've already discussed maximum duration of HP, so I'm going to skip that one. Percentage of sources exceeding an MCL. Again, we're looking at source water data, and if you've exceeded an MCL for one of those sources, then it's 1 point. If not, 0. Bunser, are there any questions related to these?
Yes. So it's more like a suggestion or a comment. They're saying that contrast and compare this, in parentheses, SAFER, to AB 508, signed into law in 2019.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is a comment or a request, so maybe they can provide a little bit more context. Would that person want to raise their hand and provide more context? All right, I'm going to move forward, and maybe that person can provide a bit more context on what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm. I think they have their hands raised now.
Oh, awesome. Do you want to unmute them?
Sure. Having a hard time locating them. Okay, allowed to talk. You can unmute yourself.
It looks like it's Tim. Timothy?
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah, it was a question or a request to contrast and compare. The previous response was that there's no negative consequences, but there's an existing law that compels forced consolidation, and one that's currently being considered by the legislature, which would ramp up that concept. So it's hard to understand how these assessments would not lead to a negative consequence associated with forced consolidation.
Right. Well, I do know that has not passed yet, and the current law only allows us to do forced consolidation for our human right to water or failed water systems. But really, we try to make that a last resort. We really try to do voluntary consolidation and look at, finding long-term solutions for those communities. That's
Get it? It just seems less Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses, no negative consequences, well, except for those negative consequences associated with AB 508, where you could get forced to consolidate.
Again, that's currently only for those systems that are on the failing human right to water list, and that's very stringent criteria. But I appreciate you bringing it up. It's something I know a lot of people are tracking, is how this will evolve over time. Okay. Anything else, Tim? Okay.
No.
Cool.
Thank you, Tim. You may lower your hands now, and I can resolve your question.
Let me see if I can figure that out. Did I do it?
Yep, you did. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Let's see. We did HPA. Okay. Any other questions related to these indicators? I don't think I see a question. Okay. Accessibility. So our accessibility category is really looking at risk associated with a water system's ability to provide an adequate supply of safe drinking water. So it's really about, access to drinking water. We have 5 indicators in this category, and this one's pretty unique. It has one risk indicator, and it's the only one we have in our assessment where, depending on how you're performing, you could be automatically at risk. And that's this first one here, which is number of sources. If you are a water system that has 0 active sources and you're reliant purely on hauled water only, which is water being trucked in, that system is automatically at risk. We only have a handful of water systems across the state that fit into this category and would be on our at-risk list automatically because of this. But a lot of folks felt strongly enough that this needed to be the case for this individual indicator. Water systems that have 2 or more sources don't get any risk points for this. It's a 0. But we do have a number of water systems that only have 1 source. And 1 source does put you more at risk, and therefore it's 1 point here and with a weight of 3. We also look at absence of interties. So having an intertie helps you be a little bit more resilient, especially in areas that are prone to drought and may have source capacity issues. Absence of interties, this is a binary indicator. Either you have an intertie or you don't. Water source types, again, we're trying to look at the diversity of sources. If you have purchased water and that's your only source, you get 0.5. If you have 1 source that's groundwater or just surface water, it's 1 point here. So again, trying to look at diversity of water sources here. Okay. Then we look at, as some of you may have followed, the DWR has a drought and water shortage risk assessment that they have conducted. And we have incorporated the results of their risk assessment into our risk assessment. So if the water system is in the DWR's results in the top 10%, then they get a full risk point. Or if they're in the top 25%, they get a 1/4 point. And the weight here is 2. And then the last one is critically overdrafted groundwater basin. If the water system is located in a critically overdrafted groundwater basin where 75% or more of their service area boundary overlaps, then they get a risk point. Are there any questions, Bansri?
Yes, one just came in. They're asking, are you actively tracking the systems that have been on human right to water list, had a solution funded, and are now under consideration as at risk? Is there another solution being proposed for those systems?
So water systems, we are actively tracking our human right to water list systems. We actually refresh that in an internal database on a weekly basis. And we're trying to keep what we have posted online updated quarterly, and we're trying to move that to monthly. Water systems that are on the human right to water list, they have an open, and most of them have an open enforcement action related to an MCL violation. If a long-term solution is funded and that water system comes off the human right to water list. But because of our risk assessment and they're scoring poorly across a number of risk indicators, that system could go from human right to water to at risk and to be on our at risk list. So that may happen for some systems, but that's not a guarantee that all water systems that have been on the failing list would be on the at risk list. In terms of, is there another solution being proposed for those systems? I'm not sure if you're referring to our human right to water systems or at-risk systems, so maybe more context could be added there. Okay. Are there any other questions, Bansuri?
No.
Okay, I'm going to move over to affordability, and we have three different metrics that we look at in affordability, and we use these exact same metrics in our affordability assessment that we do for all community water systems, which I'll talk about in a bit. We look at percent of median household income, which is looking really at water rates and how much customers are paying for water for the entire year as a percentage of their income. And it's the median household income for the water service area boundary that water system serves. So we calculate median household income using census block data from the American Community Survey. So we use, this metric is used often by our Division of Financial Assistance and USDA and a bunch of other funding agencies to try to measure affordability. So this one should not be new to most water systems. Percent MHI has been around for a long time. We used two different thresholds here, 1.5% and 2.5%. 1.5% is often used by the Water Board, and 2.5% is often used by US EPA and others for measuring affordability. So someone asked before, where did we get our thresholds? This is one that's really grounded in policy and regs that a lot of the state agency and others use. Extreme water bill is another indicator here, and this is looking at the water bill, but instead of comparing it to household income, it's comparing it to other water bills across the state. So if the water bill is 150% above the statewide average, the risk score is half a point. If it's greater than 200% of the statewide average, it's 1 point. And again, what we're trying to measure here is are the customers maybe experiencing affordability challenges where they may struggle to pay their water bill, which would mean that water system potentially is having financial capacity issues, but it also means that those communities may not be able to maintain consistent access to safe drinking water because they can't afford it. And then lastly is percent shutoffs. And I do want to highlight this data point was using 2019 EAR data. We recognize that in 2020, we had the shutoff moratorium. We just collected our 2020 EAR data. This data point will not be used in next year's needs assessment. But we did use it this year because we had the 2019 data. So customers, water systems that had 10% or more of their customers that experienced shutoffs due to non-payment received 1 point with a weight of 2. Again, this data was really inconsistent because it was not a required data point through reporting. So we had a lot of water systems that were missing data in this category. So that methodology I talked about earlier about how we shifted the calculations was used a lot for this category. Okay.
Kristen?
Yep.
In reference to the previous question, Daniel says that he asked this question because there was an added point for having been put on the list.
Oh, yes. We use the past presence on the human right to water list because it indicates if a water system has had continuous issues and it's gotten on our failing list, it's an indicator that they may have more issues to come. We often see with especially our small water systems, that the ones that come out of compliance and come out frequently out of compliance, they're more likely to come out of compliance again. So they get, there is a risk point associated with being on the risk or being on our failing list more than once. So yeah, that's why we include it in our risk assessment. So good question.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try power through these because I really want to get to the spreadsheet. TMF capacity, these are all binary risk indicators, which means you either have it or you don't. It's 0 or 1, for the score. And then we have our different weights here on the right-hand side. The first one is number of service connections. And we're using this as a proxy to try to gauge the financial capacity of systems. Our small water systems are unable to spread out their costs across a large customer base. And so the smaller the system, the less financial security they often have, especially during like a financial crisis like we've been in with the COVID pandemic. Also, we use number of service connections here with 500 or less because we see that most of our violations occur with water systems that are with services of 500 service connections or less. So we are hoping to incorporate better financial capacity data points in the future. We're trying to collect some now through our EAR, but this is the best proxy metric that we've been able to use for financial capacity in this category. The rest really get at managerial and technical capacity issues. So operator certification violations, if you've had one in the last 3 years, you get a point. Monitoring and reporting violations, if you've had 2 or more over the last 3 years, you get a point. Significant deficiency, if you've had 1 or more in the last 3 years, you get a point. And then if you have extensive treatment installed, you get a point. And I'd like to invite one of our team members, David, to maybe briefly explain how extensive treatment is calculated. Don't mean to put you on the spot, David, but maybe he can unmute himself.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so extensive treatment installed is a little bit complicated, so I'll just try to briefly explain it. In general, if you have a groundwater source, I believe with a T3 or higher treatment facility, that's considered extensive. If you have surface water, which can come either from an intake that has raw surface water delivered to the water system, or you have a consecutive connection and it has any kind of treatment associated with that, it would also count as extensive treatment installed.
Great, thank you, David. We've often received questions related to that one, and we do detail that criteria in our appendix in the report if you would like to learn more. Okay, are there any more questions, Bunsteri?
Nope, not yet.
Awesome. Okay, so we take all of our calculated risk points, we do the math like I showed you earlier, and then we look at, okay, who's at risk and who's not. And we developed a threshold for our final determination of our at-risk and potentially at-risk systems by looking at how our currently failing water systems were performing. And when we looked at the data, we looked at where there were clusters of our failing water systems. And so we determined that our at-risk threshold would be 1, the number 1, and then potentially at risk is 0.75 to 1. So we often get questions, how did you figure out your threshold? And it really was looking at how our currently failing water systems were performing in the risk assessment, and then placed our threshold accordingly. And that's something we want to learn from practice. We're keeping track of all of our at-risk systems and our failing water systems and trying to learn as we move forward and adjust our risk assessment assumptions accordingly over time. Okay, I am going to now pop over. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to pop over to our, I think it's this one, to our spreadsheet that has the results. Nope, that's the affordability one. All right, bear with me. Get to the right one. EAR. I have a lot of spreadsheets open right now. Here we go. Sure. All right. Do we all see the risk assessment results spreadsheet?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. So, we published our big report that, did a lot of different analysis showing, which systems were on the, or how systems across the state were performing and whatever. We have a list of our currently at-risk systems posted on our website in this spreadsheet. We wanted to make everything publicly available, all of the underlying data, so that everyone can understand, how the methodology worked and why a water system may be on our list. So this is a separate attachment that's posted on the website. We tried to include as much information here as possible so that you as a user don't need to bounce back and forth between this attachment and the report to understand what's in here. So there are quite a few number of tabs, and I'm going to walk you through those. And I have a bunch of staff on the call, a bunch of teammates who can help answer questions about this if you have any. I do want to point out, if you've downloaded this attachment on our website over the last few months, I do encourage you to go back today and download a fresh copy, because we have made a few changes to the spreadsheet since we posted the original spreadsheet back in April. So you can, when you are in the spreadsheet, if you go to the very last tab that says updates, you should be using version 3, and that's going to be your most up-to-date risk assessment spreadsheet. We've been keeping track in this tab, and to try to be as transparent as possible when we've made some updates, where we made the updates, and what we did. We got some feedback after we posted everything that we had some mapping issues on some of our tabs where the data wasn't lining up perfectly with the water system, so it wasn't displaying correctly. So it looked like it was the wrong data, but it was actually just a data mapping issue. So those things have been fixed. So please make sure you're using the most up-to-date risk assessment spreadsheet. I was told too that if you've downloaded this document in the past from our website, that sometimes because of how your web browser works, if it recognizes that you downloaded the wrong, like an older version, it will re-download the older version. So you have to either open your browser in incognito mode, or you need to remove your saved files and try to download it again. So if you have any issues, please reach out to us through our Safer email account, and we'll make sure that you get the most up-to-date version. But you can double check it by looking at the last tab. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through how to navigate this, and then we're going to dive into maybe a few examples. So on the first tab, which is background, it just gives you again a snapshot of who was included in the risk assessment, similar stuff to what I showed you in our PowerPoint presentation. And we also have links to the different white papers and things that we've published that got us here. So it's all connected in one place. We also have in here, and I really want to emphasize this, we have a link to a Microsoft form for water systems and folks to submit data change requests. No data set is perfect. And if you're looking at any of the raw data that we have in here and you notice something is incorrect, you can let us know, and we will work with the appropriate folks internally to try to see if that data change needs to be made and make it in the right database and then update it here. So we are responding to data change requests coming in through this Microsoft form, and that's linked here in the spreadsheet as well.
Kristen, we received another question. They're asking, can you also estimate the number of households, individuals, and ethnicity that are affected by those water systems that are currently in the high risk category?
I need to double check our tabs. Let me just look at this one. I know we have a bunch of hidden tabs here, but I think, and I'd have to double check, I think we may include a tab in here that has population served. So you'll know the number of individuals or estimated population that's served by that at-risk water system. In terms of ethnicity, that's not something that we track here, but you may be able to use OWIHA's Human Right to Water tool or their the Cal EnviroScreen tool to try to query that. In terms of number of households, we kind of use our population served or number of service connections, which we also include in this data set as a proxy for that. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, are there any other questions, Bansuri?
Yes. Another one, Jackie asks, do you need to be from the public water system to submit data change request? For example, can a consultant working for public water system submit a data change request?
It's a fantastic question, Jackie. We do not have any limits on who submits the request. We do ask that you identify yourself. So if it's from a consultant, that's good. We want to know that because we'll need to definitely still check in with our main contact at the water system to confirm it. But you do not have to be from a public water system to submit the data change request. Good question. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions?
Nope.
Okay. So that's background tab. We have tab navigation, which summarizes what you'll find on each of the tabs. And you can see we've got 24 tabs in this spreadsheet. Don't be too overwhelmed, or a little bit less than that because they're categories. We have definitions of all of the risk indicators in here. It is in the final report, but if you don't want to open up the report and you only want to look at the spreadsheet, we do include each risk indicator, the definition. We include the individual data points that make up that risk indicator. And we have a summary of where those data sources are for each of those. And we also say when the data was pulled. So you met when I was providing an overview of all the risk indicators. In some cases, I said, the past 3 years or the past 2 years. So this explains the exact dates that we use to query the data that is in this spreadsheet. Okay, so that's definitions, and you can see them all in here. We also summarize all of those slides that I just walked you through for each individual risk indicator, the individual indicators, their thresholds, the scores, the weights, all of that is also detailed in the Excel document. But this is the one where I tell people to start, go to the risk assessment results summary tab. And this is where you go to find your water system by name or their PWS ID to figure out whether or not they're at risk. So when you go to a water system, you can look at what their weighted score was per category and their total weighted score. We have their risk assessment result, which could be at risk, potentially at risk, or not at risk. The last step of our risk assessment is to exclude the systems that are currently on the human right to water list, because you can't be a failing system and then an at risk of failing water system at the same time. So what we do is we do the risk assessment for all of these water systems, and then we exclude the human right to water list. For the data that we used for the report that we put out in April, we used the human right to water list from the end of December to then come up with our final tally of at-risk systems. So I'm always encouraging people when they're trying to figure out if their system is at risk or not, to look at column P and R. R is going to tell you whether or not you were, officially at risk or on the human right to water when we did our assessment and released the results in April. But as I mentioned before, we're constantly updating our human right to water list based on a SWRCB query once a week. And so systems are coming on and off the human right to water list all the time. And so if a system maybe was human right to water, but they've come back into compliance, earlier this month, then they would be designated at risk because their risk assessment result says that they are at risk. So there was a question about that earlier, and that's how we've made that determination. We are looking to do a data refresh in June/July, so coming up pretty soon here, where we're going to be updating a lot of, not all, but most of the risk indicators and the data in this spreadsheet. So, and one of the big things that we're going to do is refresh the human right to water list here so that we have a very fresh new at-risk list. So that will be updated soon. Okay, are there any questions, Bansri, on this?
No, Rajinder wanted to point out that just 1 hour ago, BBC in UK just ran a very lengthy video on the terrible state of the US water system and that low-income families are worst affected. So I've been trying to respond them privately, and I was mentioning that we have done affordability assessment to capture some of that, and we will be enhancing our affordability assessment in upcoming iterations.
Perfect. Thank you, Bansri. Okay, so this is where I tell people to start. So you find the system that you're looking for, or if you're looking for a bunch of systems, come in here and see if they're at risk. If you want to understand why that water system is at risk, you need to do the following. So you take a look at how they're scoring across these categories. So this water system, for example, you can see that they got, and I'll try to zoom in here. They have 0.4 in TMF, no score. Looks like they were excluded from the affordability assessment. 2.8 in accessibility and a 4 in water quality. So this tells me that they really got most of their risk points in water quality and accessibility. So I'm going to go look for this water system in those. I'm going to copy this PWS ID. I'm going to go try to find out why, and I'm going to dig in maybe in accessibility. So I'm going to navigate to those tabs. We've included some analysis in here. So if you wanted to look at the county stuff, we break up each tab where we have the calculated indicators with none of the risk indicator weights associated with it. So if you go in here, you can see for each of the risk indicators how they were performing, right? And then we have indicator threshold scores. So all of those scores that I just walked you through, this is where they're getting points. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to search for my water system that I just found. So here's that water system. Let's just make it yellow. Okay, so I see that they got half a point here for the increasing presence of water quality trends. They were on the human right to water list once. They got half a point here. They are getting a full point for maximum duration of HPE. So that's a big point there. And they got percentage of sources exceeding an MCL. So lots of points in water quality. And then I'm looking at accessibility. And it looks like they got a solid point, right? Remember, 1 is the highest score, unweighted. So for 4 of the 5 indicators, they got a full risk point. The only one that they didn't get a risk point for is the DWR drought risk assessment. So I'm going to dig in further and be like, okay, well, why? Let's go look at the individual data. So this is, if you wanted to look at it weighted, this is when the weights are all applied to it. Okay, so I know that one of the ones that they got a full point on was this one, which is maximum duration of HPE. And if you remember, this one is looking at 9 years of water quality data, and it's averages across each year, if I'm remembering correctly. And what this was a data point that was generated by OWIHA. And let me squish this down a little bit so you can see it. It looks at, I believe, 13 different contaminants, and you can see them all detailed up here. And what we've done is try to make it really easy so you can see where they're actually exceeding the MCL threshold. So we know that this system had one, oops, Control F, find this water system. Okay, so we've tried to make it so it automatically highlights in its color when it's been exceeded. So you can see here that this water system, here's their 9 years of data. Oops, go up a little bit. So it looks like arsenic has been a real challenge for this system, and it's all arsenic. So if we scroll to the right, yeah, they're not hitting it for any of the other contaminants. So yeah, this system each year is arsenic. So if this system was, trying to figure out why did they get a point here, it highlights, let's see if we can find a few examples. You can see the cell is highlighted in the color, and it's the result that got it on that triggered the threshold. Okay, we also know that this one, let's see, in the accessibility raw data, let's find our water system. Find next. Here we go. This one. All right, so number of water sources, it only has one, and it's groundwater, right? And that was one of our thresholds. If it only has one water source, it gets a risk point. Probably should have highlighted it. All right, for water source types, again, only one. Presence of interties, none. No intertie. It did not exceed the threshold for the drought risk assessment. It wasn't in the top 25%, but 100% of its water service area is in a critically overdrafted basin. So it got a risk point there. So again, trying to provide all of the underlying data so it's clear to understand why that water system received the risk points that it did. So hopefully this is helpful. What we're trying to do over the next year is develop a web-based tool that helps people navigate this a lot easier, so you don't have to dive into a spreadsheet, because we know that this can be cumbersome. We want to have some sort of dashboard so it's really clear which risk indicators water systems were not performing well on, and understand kind of why. I do want to highlight, and I didn't get to talk about this earlier, is that the way that we selected our final risk assessment threshold of, a score of 1. When you look at the data, in order to be considered at risk, on average, the water system needs to have exceeded a risk threshold of more than 6 or 7 risk indicators. So you really have to be, the water system really needs to be performing poorly across a number of indicators in order to get on the at-risk list. It's not going to be just based off of one risk indicator alone, unless it's a system that has 0 active sources and they rely purely on hauled water. That's the only one that's going to get you automatically on the at-risk list. Okay, but as you can see, we've tried to be super clear about all of the data, the underlying data that led to all of the calculations and determinations for the risk points and the final risk classification for that water system. Are there any questions about this?
No. I do not see any questions.
No questions. Okay, awesome. So I'm not going to linger in here if there's no other questions about the risk assessment results and spreadsheet. I'm going to transition then over to the affordability assessment. So I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint again. I guess before I move there, I want to, if you're navigating the spreadsheet and you're seeing a data point for an individual water system that is not accurate, or you don't think it's accurate, you can use our data change request form to submit a request to have that data changed in the risk assessment. Okay, the affordability assessment. It's very similar because we used the same data points to conduct it, but it was conducted for a much different inventory of water systems. So the purpose of our affordability assessment was to identify disadvantaged community water systems that have customer charges that exceed the affordability threshold established by the Water Board. Unfortunately, the legislation and SB 200 and everything else does not define what an affordability threshold is. And so we've been working with our stakeholders and internally to develop metrics and to come up with thresholds that we can use to assess affordability. Our affordability assessment used the 3 affordability risk indicators that are also used in the risk assessment, which is percent median household income, extreme water bill, and percent shutoffs. And we use the exact same thresholds, and we've already discussed those. What's different about our affordability assessment is that it's conducted for all community water systems. So our risk assessment was very narrow and only looked at our smaller public water systems, 3,300 service connections or less. Our affordability assessment looked at all sized community water systems that we had data for. And because of the definition and how it's laid out in SB 200, we needed to identify the disadvantaged community water systems that exceeded the affordability threshold. So what we did was we looked at performance for DAC and SDAC systems and how those systems performed across these affordability indicators. So this is a little quick comparison of the risk assessment versus the affordability assessment and kind of the overlap systems analyzed. So about 2,900 systems were included in the affordability assessment. And this is just one of many graphs that are in the report. For percent median household income, we had the minimum threshold, which was 1.5%. We had 121 DAC systems exceed that threshold, and we had 313 SDAC systems exceed the threshold, and then a number of non-DAC systems that exceeded the threshold. And then you can see the results for extreme water bill and percent shutoffs. Now, what we did in the report was we broke it down by DAC and SDAC systems, and then we also took a look at how our at-risk and human right to water list systems were performing across these metrics as well, and that's all detailed in the report. But again, we made all of this data public, and you can download an affordability assessment results spreadsheet from our needs assessment website. And so I'm going to hop on over to that spreadsheet to show you what that looks like. Okay. I think it's this one. Here we go. It should look kind of familiar because we tried to structure these the same. We have the background on who was included, what was it for? And again, because we're using the same metrics for both the affordability assessment that were included in the risk assessment, if a water system or someone else, a contractor, sees that a data point is inaccurate or maybe missing, they can use the Microsoft form to submit a data change request or to provide a data point that was missing. We were missing a lot of the water rates data that we needed for the affordability assessment. Again, tab navigation, we included the definitions in here. Again, an update on the thresholds the scores that were used, because we use the same thresholds, the same, the scoring is a little bit different, where instead of we had 0 to 1, we had 0 to 1.5. And that's all detailed in the report. All right. And this is really the results. If you go to Affordability Assessment, you'll see the PWS ID, and then you'll see how they performed. Let me squish this. How they performed across the different indicators. I do want to point out, you can see we have a lot of systems where we're missing some data, but what it's showing you here are the scores. So, for example, for percent shutoffs, this one, you know, the score was either 0 or 1 or missing, because it only had one threshold. You either had 10% or more of your customers with non-payment, or you didn't have that. So a 0 would be they did not meet the threshold. For extreme water bill and where is it? And percent MHI, we had two thresholds. We had, for percent MHI, we had 1.5% as the minimum threshold, and then we had 2.5% as the upper threshold. So if you hit the minimum threshold, you get 1 point. If you hit the upper threshold, you got 1.5 points here. So if you wanted to look at all of the systems that had a median percent MHI at 2.5% or above, this is the list of systems. If you wanted to see that list of systems and only DAC, you can come here and filter that out. Oops. DAC. And there's your list. So this is, if you're looking to do kind of more statewide analysis, you can definitely use the spreadsheet to do that. For systems, go back to all this. So for systems that hit, you can see we've got some systems that hit the highest thresholds across all three indicators. So their total affordability assessment score would be the highest it could be, which is 4. It's only a handful of systems, and then we had a few that were at 3.5%, and then a bunch at 3. So you can explore that. I do want to highlight here, because we get questions about this sometimes. You know, for the purposes of this assessment, we needed to calculate MHI, obviously for percent MHI, and we use that MHI value to determine, for the purposes of this assessment, the DAC status of that water system. When a water system comes into the water board for funding and goes through the funding process with the Division of Financial Assistance, DFA uses a slightly different, more water system specific MHI determination method. So we encourage people to kind of, you can use our calculation here, but DFA may have a different determination based on their methodology, which is just slightly different than ours. But we tried to mirror ours as closely as we could to what is used by DFA. But we do a statewide data analysis for that, while DFA's process is at a system per system level. So we do include some language around that in our report, but I just wanted to highlight it there, that this is a slightly different methodology than what DFA uses, and therefore not something that DFA will use to determine a water system's disadvantaged community status. And then we did include on the far right here the safer status of the system. Again, this is based on the December date, so this is going to be refreshed later when we do the data refresh. Okay, but you can look at all the underlying data for each indicator. So we have percent MHI, which has the water rates data, the MHI, or the MHI data. It's over here. There we go. MHI information. We've got percent shutoffs. You can see we're definitely missing data for some systems. Extreme water bill here, and then we track updates. We haven't had any for this spreadsheet yet. Are there any questions? Anything that's come in, Bunsri?
No, not so far.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that was the overview of the two spreadsheets. And I'll just stay on the line if anyone has any questions. Was there anything from the needs analysis unit staff? Any point you wanted to make or correct anything I've said that was inaccurate? Okay, hearing none. We've got about 33 people still with us. Please feel free to use the Q&A, or you can raise your hand and ask a question. All right, I don't see anything. So we might just end things early. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted on our website once it's available.
Okay, we got one question.
Okay.
Rajinder is asking, do you also include data from each water system as to the technology they use to produce clean water?
So we do look at the risk indicator that David mentioned, which is kind of looking at the technical difficulty of, related to treatment, which is if it's a T3 or higher, we use that as a risk indicator, but we're not looking at anything more specific related to the treatment technologies used by an individual system. So we're not, I see the question that came in asking whether or not we're looking at basic filtration versus more complex solutions. Again, that should be reflected in the operator level, that T3 or higher. The more complicated the treatment and the requirements are, the tougher it is. And honestly, what it's also looking at is if that system was to fail, it probably means that source water quality is not that great, and you could have folks exposed to poor water quality. So all good questions. We are looking for recommendations on improvement to the risk assessment and the affordability assessment. A lot of fantastic recommendations were made when we were developing this methodology. We had over 129 identified potential risk indicators. A lot of those we couldn't use because we didn't have enough data across all water systems that was machine readable that we could actually use. And so we're trying to figure out how we can collect better data and make our assessment more robust. So any recommendations are always welcome. We will continue to host public webinars and workshops and work with stakeholders to refine this methodology. Set of methodologies, because we are going to be doing this on an annual basis. All right, any other questions, Bansri?
Nope. Oh, okay, one just came in. In regards to public water system interties, does the weighting positively or negatively affect your score?
Great question. If the water system has an intertie, then it is a positive thing. They don't get any risk points. But if the water system does not have an intertie or an emergency intertie, then they do get one risk point for that. When we put out our data, there were a number of water systems that indicated that our intertie data was not accurate, and we pull that from SWRCB. And so those water systems worked with their district engineer to get that updated in our database, and then we're including that in our data refresh that we're doing, again, kind of late June, early July time frame. So I do encourage you to take a look at that. We have seen that there's some incomplete data related to interties in our SWRCB inventory. Okay. Any other questions?
Nope. Rajinder says the US bought an extra one. He says that in the US during the pandemic, the number of bottled water sales increased by 33% from last year. It's an informative statement.
Yep. I think as we're entering into a drought, I think we're very cognizant of, issues around accessibility. And there's a lot of talk about how we can improve our risk assessment to better accommodate maybe new data that we're collecting related to the drought and get at source capacity issues.
So he asks, what does this tell you as to the water quality of water?
If he's referring to the risk assessment, the water system is meeting water quality standards if it's an at-risk system. If the water system has an MCL violation, it's no longer at risk, it's failing, and that water system would be on our human right to water list. So at-risk systems are supplying safe drinking water. The purpose of the risk assessment, again, is to identify those systems that may be at risk of failing. So we can target our resources towards them through technical assistance or funding in order to help them stay off of the human right to water list.
Okay, someone's asking, how will the scores be used? Will high-risk systems be provided technical and financial assistance?
Right, and that's, I just discussed that. So yet our results are used to help inform how we prioritize our technical assistance and funding. It doesn't guarantee funding, but it does place water systems that are on the list at a higher priority compared to those that are not. I will say that we do have a circuit rider program with RCAC to provide direct technical assistance to our at-risk water systems, and we're reaching out to water systems to see if they're interested in working with RCAC. So if you are with a water system that is on the at-risk list and you are interested in working with one of our technical assistance providers, please reach out. We can help you connect. I think there was a question about whether or not these spreadsheets are publicly available, and yes, they are. They're on our needs assessment website. And let me see if I can.
I have provided them with the
URL. Awesome. Thanks, Bansuri. Okay.
And Rajinder again asks, do you measure the number of bottled water sales in your area?
We do not. We do not look at bottled water sales in the state, and we don't use that as a metric in our risk assessment. Although we do keep track as part of our SAFER program, water systems that are running into issues with source capacity or where they have a water quality issue and they need hauled water or bottled water supplied to their community as an interim measure. That is something that the SAFER program helps support, and we are tracking that and looking to see how that may be eventually incorporated into our risk assessment, but it's not currently captured in our risk assessment. Yeah, all good questions. I appreciate your guys' engagement. We're coming up on towards the end, and we'll continue to stay on to answer any questions.
Kristen, last minute question. Lee asks, are groundwater level trends included in the risk assessment analysis?
They are not. Groundwater level trends is not, and I was just on some calls earlier this week to talk about this. We're trying to get a better sense of, groundwater risk associated with drought and water availability. The purpose of our, we include as one of our risk indicators the DWR drought risk assessment, which is trying to look at, it looks, I think, at 30 some indicators to try to assess water systems that are at risk of drought. And we use that as one of our data points. But there has been a lot of public feedback over the last few months, encouraging us to try to get better source capacity risk indicators incorporated into our assessments. And so that's something we're actively trying to look at now to try to see how we can get that into our methodology, because we don't have good data on source levels and source capacity risk. So something we're looking into.
Lee is again asking, are you partnering with any NGOs?
We've had a lot of NGO and advocacy groups participating in all of our public outreach webinars and that we've done over the last year. So we've hosted, I think, 14 public workshops over the last year and a half or so on our methodology development for the full needs assessment. And we've had associations and NGOs and community groups and water systems participating in those workshops, sending us comment letters and feedback that really helped us refine our risk assessment methodology. And that's why everything's been so public. We've put out a lot of different white papers and PowerPoint presentations, and we have webinar recordings on our website. So if you're interested in learning more about how this methodology has evolved, you know, I really encourage you to take a look at what we have on our website. And that doesn't mean that it stops here. This is really just our baseline assessment. We are looking to further refine it, to improve it, include better data. And so we're going to continue to work with our NGO partners, our water systems, and other stakeholders as we move forward. And I hope all of you are part of that conversation. If you're subscribed to our SAFER email list, you'll get the public notices when we're going to be doing webinars and workshops. So I encourage you to sign up for that mailing list so you get notified when we're going to be hosting these if you want to weigh in on how this methodology evolves over time. Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions. I will say that the only thing we didn't cover today is our cost assessment model and the funding gap analysis. So if you're interested in learning about that component of the needs assessment, you can check out our needs assessment website. If you type in Google, you know, State Water Board needs assessment, you should find our webpage. We do have a webinar recording from April where we release the results of our report and we go over the results for each of the different components. So you can learn more from that webinar recording. And then you can also check out all of the webinar workshops that we hosted over the past year. Those recordings are all also on that website if you want to dig into the methodology a little bit more. Okay. I don't see any more questions related to the risk assessment or the affordability assessment. So I'm going to conclude this webinar. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today. I hope you found this informative. If you have any data change requests or any follow-up questions related to the risk assessment or the affordability assessment, please reach out. We are here to help answer your questions. So again, thanks so much, and please participate in our upcoming workshops related to these topics.